George Ohr was born in 1857 and he died in 1918. He was the self-proclaimed mad potter of Biloxi. He was a marketer of the first order. He felt like he did not fit into his family and his community. He took many years to find himself and finally discovered pottery under the tutelage of another well-known Biloxi potter, Joseph Fortune Meyer, who was the founder of Newcomb Pottery in New Orleans. So George Ohr went to New Orleans and worked with Joseph Meyer at Newcomb Pottery, teaching the young ladies how to make pottery. George Ohr began his potting career making functional ware. People in his community would purchase, so there would be strawberry pots for planting in strawberry jars that we even use today. There were chimney flues, tourist ware, and water jugs. And so this was unglazed work, made it quickly, and it provided for his family of 10 children, 5 survived to adulthood. So George started out as a functional potter, making everyday work for the community, like potters have done for eons. In 1894, there was a tragic fire that destroyed George Ohr's studio. He lost 10,000 pieces. The pieces that he salvaged from the fire, he called his burned babies. And some people find that a little disturbing. Every piece to him was like a person. It was an individual creation. So he wrapped them in newspaper and stored them away for posterity, and they have found their way into important collections all over the world because they are an important part of the story of the man. George Ohr dug his clay from the local river banks of the Chautauqua, brought it in by boat, processed it in his studio. He began to expand and explore with more artistic pieces. He did not sell these pieces to the general public. He began to do things that, while now we think nothing of it in terms of contemporary ceramics, during the Victorian era, this would have been unheard of. He pinched, pulled, and twisted the wet clay in a way that has become his signature. Then he glazed these with extraordinarily brilliant colored glazes. So his work was simply not accepted by the general public. He put most of this artwork away, longing to sell it to a few major museums like the Delgado in New Orleans. The Smithsonian received a number of pieces and kept them, but did not accession them into their permanent collection until the 1980s. The Delgado sent a good deal of the work back to Georgia. George's work became more and more inventive, fresher, more innovative. We today would assume were made by a modernist sculptor or potter from the 1950s or the 1960s. It was not really recreated by any other ceramic artist working at that time, and George was really the first studio potter. George did everything. Dug the clay, processed the clay, made the pots, fired the pots, glazed the pots. So he controlled the entire process. And that was a first studio potter in this country. George always made pieces that he would sell to the tourists that visited the Gulf Coast. This is the bread and butter work that supported his family. So you'll see dribble mugs that you have to cover one of the holes with your finger, or when you drink from the mug it will dribble down your chin. There are inkwells, sculptural pieces, or sort of knickknacks. We also have the infamous brothel tokens that George made and that were very popularly sold. And we have to remember that George rebuilt after the big fire, and he built a 3-story high pagoda in downtown Biloxi and painted it hot pink. He was an important tourist attraction. So this work is an important part of what he sold to the tourists. As George developed his sense of aesthetics, he began to move away from glazing completely. He was annoyed that the marketplace demanded that his pieces be brightly colored and more traditional forms. George wanted to create a body of work that rejected the criticisms of all those people who wanted him to make what they wanted him to make for the marketplace. They wanted brightly colored pots, that were more traditional in form. They loved his glazes. They did not like his innovative forms. And his way of responding was, I'm not going to glaze the pots at all. You see really thin, manipulated, folded pieces of clay that represent what many view as George's greatest accomplishment. They are pure form, they are not made for function, and when you hold them, they feel as if you're holding a leaf. They are so thin and so lightweight. He always said that someday his pottery would be treasured, and of course it is now, and so his wish for his work has come true. George really stopped making pottery in 1906, 07, and completely closed his studio in 1910, which was 100 years before we opened the Ohr-O'Keefe Museum of Art. The Ohr-O'Keefe Museum of Art is a one-of-a-kind museum, like its namesake, George Edgar Orr, and like its architect, Frank Gehry, the Canadian whose family moved to LA when he was an early teen. He also drove a truck, couldn't figure out what to do with his life, finally went to college, and his first classes in California were in pottery. And it was suggested to him that he should think about architecture. So Frank Gehry began his journey in challenging all of the old concepts about architecture and built Guggenheim Bilbao just prior to the real work that began here at the Ohr-O'Keefe with the other namesake for the museum and the visionary, Jerry O'Keefe. And Jerry O'Keefe is a former fighter pilot in World War II. The History Channel has done a piece on him. Jerry O'Keefe was also mayor of Biloxi and served in many capacities in the community. He was also one of the founders of the Walter Anderson Museum of Art and the Mary C. O'Keefe Cultural Center. Jerry O'Keefe was the visionary who wanted something new for Biloxi. Did not know Frank Gehry. They met through a mutual friend in New Orleans. Jerry flew out to LA, met with Frank Gehry, took him a small George Orr piece. Frank Gehry was very engaged by the work of George Orr and agreed to design this museum. That design process began in 1998 and it ended in 2003. Construction began in 2004 and Hurricane Katrina hit in August 29th of 2005. So everything stopped on the coast. The Ohr-O'Keefe began their reconstruction in 2008 and they opened phase 1 of the 5 Gehry designed buildings. Phase 1 in 2010, they opened the Mississippi Sound Welcome Center, which greets our visitors with information, a front desk receptionist, visitor amenities, and a wonderful display of Mississippi handmade fine art and craft. The IP Casino Resort Spa Exhibitions Gallery was the second building of that phase 1, and it is a more minimalist and contemporary space. So the work that we show there tends to be more modernist in feel. The Gallery of African American Art was the third building to open, and it was designated to feature the work by or about African Americans and other diverse ethnicities. The Center for Ceramics is open. We have demonstrations daily in the Pottery Studio. The pods will be opening with the permanent home for George and his work in the spring of 2014. This project that was so damaged by Katrina, like so much of the coast, is now rebuilding and reopening like so many things on the coast. So come and visit.